And after I had sold it and brought the last dollar here into Canada, that's when there was no more money coming from the old country. So basically I became, for a certain member of the clique business community, a cow that didn't milk anymore for them. And
I see.
Add to this, you know, I was running things on a shoestring budget, and what I'd done already in the old country, I was building a lot of the machinery by myself, you know.
Right, right.
I figured I had an edge opposite the other farmers. I saw so many farms in my time, you know, going bankrupt because
they overextended and borrowed too much
of machinery and everything, you know.
Right.
And I figured I could stick it out a lot longer than they could.
Right. I understand, but so what you're saying is you feel like you're a TI, targeted individual, where they knew what your bank accounts were, they had an idea of what your overseas assets were, and once they felt those assets were all now invested, because my understanding was they were inviting farmers to come and to take this agricultural land before it went wild again.
The impression we were being given by the provincial government. They didn't want this good farmland to revert back to forest land.
Right.
You know.
Right. So after you put your money into getting these places out of foreclosure or whatever, and you had no more...
I bought the farm with the Farm Credit Corporation, is a federal agricultural landing account corporation. You know, I took on a 25-year mortgage. You know.
Wow, the Crown Corporation.
Yeah, and I had to pay off the mortgage, but then a few years later, some people, they would tell me, oh, you fellas, you shouldn't be able to come here and buy a farm. You should be working for us. And guess what kind of ethnic background they have? They figured because they came from the British Isles, they were something special, and everybody else had to lick their boots, the way many of them had done for centuries in their colonies.
Right. So you were discriminated against.
Well, and then I was being told, the land was granted to our forefathers and their descendants for all times. And I asked, how about when they sell it? Oh, it belongs to them anyway. I said, wow. That's nice. And I'm stuck with a 25-year mortgage. A few years later, they came with another twist. Oh, you know, in the Old Testament, every 50 years was a year of Jubilee, where the properties would be given back to the original owners. And I said that if you want to have those laws on the books, put them on the books, but don't sucker us immigrants in.
Right, right.
Then another thing, I would have had the choice to either come to the States or to Canada. But I had read a lot about the history with the native people in the States, and basically what was the slogan among some people was, only a dead Indian is a good Indian. And we were being told abroad that Canada treated these native people well.
Right.
You know, and they had basically just land claim settlements made with them. But what I found out, especially over the last few years, in Canada, maybe the native people got even treated worse than in the States. You know,
right.
But it all has been swept underneath a great Canadian carpet.
Yeah, yeah.
And anybody who dares to mention that, you know, he automatically becomes a target for a certain clique.
That's heartbreaking, Werner.
Yeah.
I mean, did you sustain a lot of depression over this?
No, look, Paula, I read somewhere sometimes, when the people have the hardest to fight, they are the lowest rates of suicides.
Ah.
They don't have time to get depressed.
You have all the animals to care for, right?
I was being so kept so busy and trying to deal with all the situations, and there was no time for depression.
It's so awful, though, that you work so hard and then you get the land swindled. Like you say, on one hand, they're attracting people to build up land that's going to revert to forest land, so they don't want to lose that. But at the same time, as soon as the farmer starts to make a little headway, they say, oh, by the way, you don't really own this land. You were always working as a slave. And if you knew that from the get-go, you wouldn't have gotten involved in such an arrangement.
But you know something, what makes me so angry? When I first came, the first few years, I met a lot of the old farmers, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They were decent, most of them as a whole, they were decent, hard-working people. And the way they had been lied to by those experts in the government and by the politicians, you know, and basically many of them brought to an early grave. It makes me just furious.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, the most important annual event always has been and always will be the harvest.
Yeah. And many times over the years, it was a bitter harvest. It was a bitter harvest.
Was it bitter because when the fruits of their labor came in, the bill collectors came around and said, oh, by the way, you signed something here and now I own all of this?
I could, somehow I tweaked my way through, you know, I started doing work off the farm, and then the latter years, half of the farm was a woodlot. When I came, it had been basically plundered, but then over the years, the trees started growing again, and I did silviculture work, and it took some merchantable wood out, and between that and building for my neighbors machinery and so on, do the odd job, I basically managed to stay financially afloat.
Right. How many acres is your property?
Well, it's over 600 acres.
That's a lot of land to take care of. How many people are in your family working it?
I came here alone, and I was doing the work alone. And even I helped my neighbors, you know.
Wow.
Because I wanted to be a good neighbor, and not what they told about the Germans. Oh, yeah, those Germans, you know. I wanted to show that, you know, they had a completely wrong impression about the German people.
That's what I meant about community. The people that you helped when you first came, did they come to your assistance later on when you needed it? Or were they too afraid?
Very few, but maybe not in an open way, but in a hidden way. They sympathized a lot of people, and in one way or another they helped me.
Right. Marie Tooker said the same thing when she would be very down and out and be so discouraged because she was so attacked by all of the forces that you're talking about. She would be at the checkout stand and someone would say, Marie Tooker, do you remember me? And she'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't. And Marie, I'll never forget you. When I had no home, nowhere to go, you helped me, you got me on my feet, I will never forget you. And she said that's when her reward came in, just when she needed it. She helped about 1,000 people, but she was showing the local people that these federal funds, that they were interested in getting federal money and they needed an excuse of a homeless person. There was no motivation to actually rehabilitate the person and get them going on their way.
Basically, the government looks out for the government, the bureaucrats look out for bureaucrats, and they want to maintain all this and hopefully increase a caseload to provide more of their own kind with paychecks.
Exactly. But meanwhile, because you had helped your neighbors, even if they were too fearful to come out when you really needed it, you energetically or subtly felt the support, so you would more or less forgive them for not directly standing up.
You know, if you want to hold a grudge, if I wanted to hold a grudge over so many years, it would have destroyed me.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. Now, can you describe, because so far on this show, describe the lasers and the masers and that type of horrible destruction. And I think over 300 of your cattle have suffered this way.
Well, over the last 18 years, they had killed at least 320 or 330 cows and calves. And most of the animals, they died a miserable death. They were hanging on sometimes for days, you know.
Describe what was done and what type of lethal directed energy weapon would do this type of damage.
What was especially deadly was where they modified with very specific frequency, with heat-producing frequency or infrared, no, ultraviolet, where they modified the atmosphere, the gases, the atmospheric gases, like the nitrogen and the oxygen in the air. Oxidized the nitrogen and focus that energy beam in front of the nose of the animals or in the vicinity of the nose of the animals, and then the animals were breathing in this high concentration of nitrogen oxide, which formed nitric acid, one of the most corrosive acids. And you imagine that getting into the lungs and basically being breathed in and going through the digestive system, the urinary tract, and the immense corrosive damage that's been done.
Yeah, you even showed that where the cattle urinated, that the next season, the weeds that would grow up would...
4 months, that spot would not grow grass anymore.
Unbelievable.
And it is just plain basic science. And to make sure I wasn't way out in left field, I had contacted over the years some of the scientists who had done the research, Dr. Richter, Dr. Burkhardt, and several others, and whose research had been published in PubMed. Basically, it was an old hat, you know. And when I explained this all to the district veterinarian...
Werner, can you hold that thought? We have to pause for station identification, and we'll be right back with you on that important point.
And that is, you're listening to WIOFLP, Woodstock 104, and back to Pot Talk with Joe Barton, this week with Paula Gloria. Go ahead.
Thank you, Werner. We didn't want to interrupt you, but we're so engrossed in your story, and we want people out in the Woodstock Valley, because this show's got quite a reach, and I'm encouraged that it's going to have a reach to farmers. And later on, Randy will tell a little story about what happened at our Christmas dinner, so you'll have an idea of the community that this radio station's reaching. But I don't want to interrupt you. So now you went to the PubMed publishers?
No, I went in contact with some of the scientists who had done the research about exposure to nitrogen oxide gases and to high levels of ozone.
Right.
And how deadly, especially the nitrogen oxide gases, were. And in the documentary Farmer's Ordeal, there is, I show the research, the published research in PubMed. Basically, it did not go on my manure pile, and I contacted the scientists to make sure that I wasn't way out in left field, because I don't have a PhD to my name. I'm
Right.
just a simple farmer.
Right.
You know?
And what did they say?
Well, they confirmed, when I was talking to them, they confirmed everything what I had been documenting, and I could give them even more information, because they worked only with laboratory animals, you know, like with mice and so on, you know. And I did basically, I didn't want to do it, but I did the autopsies on full-grown animals, you know, on especially on cattle, you know, because I had to stop this killing, you know.
Right.
And the veterinarians and the SPCA was no help whatsoever. In the last 2.5 years, the SPCA even was shooting me in the back by making up stories in order to cover up those atrocities.
This is what happened to Marie Tooker. The SPCA really was, part of the criminal element working against her. They opened up the fences. They told lies to the media about her abusing animals. It was heartbreaking.
As I say, that's what I was dealing here in the community. There were those that had their crimes to cover up. They were spreading so many vicious rumors about me and everything, And then when I applied under the Freedom of Information Act for my files from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, most of the vital things were all blacked out.
Right.
And then in 1975, because I had found out already so many things, in order to shut me up and to sweep it underneath the great Canadian carpet, they had the gulp to put me in 1975 and 1976 under false accusation twice in the loony bin.
Right.
The second time, even though a neighbor was looking after my cattle, they sold nearly 100 head and basically at bargain basement prices at a regular occurring auction. They sold them in Sussex. They dumped them on the auction sale at the time when the price was at rock bottom. And then the administrator of estates from the provincial government, he wanted me to sign a release form releasing the provincial government from all financial liability.
And of course you didn't, right?
I didn't.
Right. Very similar to Marie Tooker, but in Marie Tooker's case, she still has a wrist that hurts because they forced her to sign. Can you imagine?
Well, as I say, I'm pretty stubborn.
Yeah, I know.
And people from my area of Germany, northern part of Lower Saxonia, are known to be pig-headed.
Yeah. And strong wrists, right?
Anyway.
Wow, it's okay.
See, Paula, about this, what I said, the environmental Watergate. Over the years, I've contacted the environmental organization. Here the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. I contacted university researchers and professors from the Environmental Studies Department at the University in Moncton. And from the university in Fredericton. I had some of those scientists here, and when they realized the extent of this travesty that was going on, they all turned chicken.
Yeah.
And one professor, Liette Vasseur, she was at the University of Moncton, and I brought a whole bag full of mutations, where they had dumped those chemicals on the plants and then they mutated. And when I checked about a week later, I asked if she had a look at them, and she said, "Oh no, we don't have the time. We are just building a new environmental studies department."
And what year was that, Werner?
Oh, that must have been now about near 20 years ago. And then 2 years later, when I was checking up on her, she was working for the Irving Company, the environmental center, Irving Eco Center in Baktush. And there is no other company, forestry company, that has caused as much devastation, to the natural
right.
woodlands and so, as the Irving Company.
So you reached out in the mid-'90s to get some governmental assistance, and she didn't...
No, Paula, as far as back as in 1981, I had contacted in regard to this environmental Watergate and the illegal dump of chemicals on farmland to the Department of Agriculture, to the crop and soil specialist, and year after year they kept bungling the tests,
So basically what you were discovering is that the agencies that are supposed to help you are kind of the mastermind of the problem itself.
If you are not the solution, if you are, what is
not part of the solution, you're part of the problem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because they either turn chicken, or they got a vested interest. Some of them, they were waiting that another farmer kicked the bucket and they could buy a farmland nice and cheap. Some of them, then they started farming there on that land. And since they knew all the ins and outs about the government bureaucracy, they had access then to all the different sources of money, how they could milk.
Right. Do you know the term RICO, racketeering?
Yeah, I've heard.
I don't know what the term is in Canada, but it must be, you know, a worldwide problem that all...
As I say, if the victims have the right to how much? Double or fourfold, you know, make the claim against those that are being convicted of racketeering.
Right. Yeah, I know, but you know how there's so much irreparable damage because you're destroying entire communities, and particularly the food source, the bread basket, you know, the lifeblood.
Paula, and here just plain some simple facts and figures.
Right.
Now the provincial government, and it's not unique here for New Brunswick, they think they can bail out their financial mismanagement, you know, by letting the shale gas company in and basically do the fracking here.
Yes.
They only, it's short-sighted, and the only economic benefit they might have in royalties, that's maybe between $100 and $200 million a year. Whereas, alone in this province, when we would produce again our food, what we easily can do without fattening the bank accounts of the shareholders in Monsanto or the chemical companies, you know, and we start again producing our own food.
What do you estimate?
That would mean at least an input into the provincial economy of between $6 and $7 billion a year, versus maybe 150 million.
Right.
And
yes.
The poisoning, the potential poisoning of the groundwater, and it does not necessarily to be happening within half a year or within a year. Slowly, those fracking fluids, they get pushed through the upper horizons of the rock above, and sooner or later, it might happen in 5 years and in 10 years, that those highly toxic fracking fluids and the methane ends up in the groundwater table.
Right.
And
now,
what I understood, between 5 and 15% of the methane that's being released through the fracking.
Now, fracking is a very big issue in this area right now. So let's approach this very slowly and carefully. And I'm going to start with a little anecdote I know. A girlfriend of mine in the Transcendental Meditation movement. I used to do this spiritual practice, and we went to different parts of the world, and we meditated in India. And my friend Janet Bradbury. We became friends, and we've stayed friends over the years. She inherited a farm with her brothers and sister in Oklahoma. And as it got harder and harder for the farmers, she's told me with great guilt, because she's married to a PhD computer designer in San Diego, and among all of the progressive communities, they all know that fracking isn't good. But she was telling me, Paula, the farmers can hardly stay on, and they're being given these big prices for fracking. And I said, Janet, because I was starting to learn about bank fraud, I said, that seems a setup, because they might offer big bucks to the farmers this year, but if pretty soon you start to depend on that income, you know, what if they lower the price all of a sudden, and you can't meet all of your expenses, and you've forgotten how to farm? That seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, there's, as I say, there are so many negative factors, you know, that are not being taken into consideration. And what I understand, at least between 5 and 15% of the methane that's being freed, it migrates slowly through the upper layers, and then is released to the atmosphere. And what I understand, methane is around 100 times more destructive to the ozone layer than carbon dioxide.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, in a very simple thing, is if you're a farmer, you know, what is the matter with the economy that a farmer can't produce food that's needed so much, whereas, like you said, fracking would, what were those multiples again? Fracking would bring in how much versus?
Here in the province, I question the the director of the shale gas company about 2.5 years ago, and figures were being thrown out that the provincial government expected about $225 million in royalties annually. So I threw that figure out to this Tom Alexander, and he said, I don't know who has come up with that figure. So I asked him point blank, will it be more, will it be less? And he said, it will be quite a bit less, especially at the start, you know. So I made the other, math about that versus if we start again producing our food.
Well, let's take a Walmart. Walmarts came into this country by starting to offer to the public prices that the local retailers couldn't buy from their wholesalers. And they were going against anti-monopoly laws. Then after they put the retailers out of business because the retailers couldn't compete, then they started to raise their prices. So I would think that the farmers would make less over time if it's in the hands of a monopoly. But now you're saying, what would the figures be if the New Brunswick area, the farmers really had a healthy economy and not this fraudulent cheating economy, and they were not importing food? What would they bring in because it's an agriculture?
As I say, if we, instead of importing 90% of the food, most of it we easily can produce here. That would mean another between $6 and $7 billion in input into the provincial economy. Because it's a known fact, every job in agriculture produces at least 4 to 5 jobs in the surrounding economy.
Right. So we're talking about bringing in billions if you just had a normal, healthy economy, although it's not controlled by big multinational corporations, versus $200 million for this fracking that everybody knows is so questionable. Is that?
And as I say, when the chicken eventually comes home to roost, maybe a few years later, that suddenly the groundwater is polluted with highly toxic fracking fluids and with methane.
Right. Not to mention that you've driven off all the farmers who are self-sufficient, stand up, they have families, and you bring on kind of a slave factory situation. These factory farms are horrendous, and I see them as a direct consequence of what I call the bank fraud, which most people aren't really studying.
A big blame is to be put on the general public. They bought all this pie in the sky that was being given to them, the picture of the pie in the sky that was being given and portrayed to them by the mainstream media.
Randy, I'd like to pause for Randy. She's shaking her head, and I know she knows a lot about mainstream media. Can you comment on this, why the public is also to blame, as what Werner said, because they bought this bill of goods?
I hate to say it, but I have a very judgmental view on some of this. I think the public is so lazy that the fascism, the totalitarianism that we're all talking about, the public lets it happen. They don't, we're only beginning to see some sort of action now by those in support of minority communities who were just being picked off by cops now, but that's even an example of how they don't, the American people don't respond to anything unless it affects them personally. And we've heard about the atrocities of Monsanto for years, and we just keep on re-electing the same Republicans or Democrats because he's my Democrat or he's my Republican. And I don't know what to say about it, except I'm sick and tired of every time everybody is, that if they're asked to sacrifice something for whatever, but that's by convenience, I don't want to sacrifice that. American, and I mean United States citizens specifically, are selfish. And they're taking the rest of the world down that road.
Our economy is deteriorating here, Werner, unless people are somehow involved in the benefits of the bank swindle. But Randy, could you at this point talk about what happened at the Christmas dinner? We have a community dinner, so Werner kind of understands our community?
Well, what I was telling Paula before that I think she was referring to is that I went there just to get my Christmas dinner and sit down and whatever, and all of a sudden there are a bunch of people around me, kind of one at the time, but it
just a second, Randy.
Yeah.
Werner may not know. Here in Woodstock, at Thanksgiving and Christmas, the entire community gets together and shares a meal. It used to be in the community center, but now the community center is being remodeled. So this one was at a church, just so you know.
Right. And what it was interesting about it was the people that were coming up to me were talking about this station. And this station is dedicated to those who either choose to abstain from the marvels of the internet, or don't want to be bugged, or just want their privacy hopefully left intact. So we try to inform everyone of news and opinions that are not usually found on FM radio. So these people were coming up to me and saying that, oh, well, this is a lifeline. This keeps me sane. I thought I was alone in feeling about this. And they're telling me that they keep it on from when we sign on to when we sign off. And then I ask one of these people, well, if that's the case, why, when we give out the phone number, don't you call? And she said, I don't have a phone. And it made me realize that not only are we trying, and apparently successfully, reaching people that aren't on the internet, we're reaching people that are completely off the grid, and all they have is a radio to hear this stuff. So hopefully we're filling their consciousness with different concepts than the go to this website and buy this concert ticket or all this other junk that goes on. And I was just amazed that there are people that are even more off of the grid than I thought they probably would be.
Right. So basic phone service, Werner, used to be something like, $5 or $6 or, under $10. And now it's over $30. There's some people, maybe they got rid of their landline, they went on their little iPhones, and then through IP address discrimination, they lost that because cellular telephone bills can be $100 a month. And some people are, that's getting really hard. Well, basic utilities should never be such that you're fracturing the community, because all of these corporations that are offering this service is offering the service ostensibly under a constitution whose mandate is to protect the coherence and the continuity of the community. So I'm hoping that Randy, that this show that we're doing with you, Werner, will become a seed, and that perhaps Randy can play it at other times during the day, and we can, for those people who still have a phone, get some call-ins. We only have one dedicated line, and we're working with you now, so we can't take call-ins.
I appreciate that, Paula. But as I say, in regard to that problem about communications and so, at one time it was a public utility, but over the last few decades, more and more of the public utilities that were owned by the people have been sold out to private companies, public-private partnership. So the basically the ones that are working for the government, or that are in the government, that they got more money to blow, and they can force through higher salaries for the bureaucrats and so on.
But that's unlawful. And this whole thing is driven by consent. These are some very, very subtle arguments. For example, you talk about the freedom of information. When I was going through some of, these struggles, I realized that the very process of filling out a form for freedom of information, it means that you're consenting that they should have this information, instead of saying, what the heck are you doing in my private space? And who is authorizing this? I think we have to get back to some very, very basic questions and not be ashamed of asking these. You definitely, you know, that's why Joe and I love you so much. You're what we call stand up.
But, you know, Paula, you mentioned their basic questions. They receive a paycheck, the public employees, the bureaucrats. They receive a paycheck because they are public servants. How is it acceptable that the servants are allowed to sell off their master's assets?
Randy?
I've never heard it framed quite like that, but it certainly is a good rhetorical question. Don't look to me for an answer because...
It's basically called embezzlement.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And we're too embarrassed to call attention to the fact that we have a missing ass. No, it gets to psychological manipulation. I mean, I've even been doing. I found something marvelous on the internet. 1992, a lady was speaking to the parents about education in Pennsylvania, and she apparently held a very high position in Ronald Reagan's administration, which, you know, my husband tends to be not enthusiastic about Republicans, but I think our problems are just light years beyond Republican and Democrat. And, you know, once you show people the basic problem, I think you have a galvanizing and unifying platform. But what she pointed out is that our education system is run by the Labor Department. In other words, they want to turn out good workers. And somebody like a self-sufficient farmer, it doesn't fit in with this overall, you know, program of cheap labor. It's slave labor.
Well, basically, with globalization, when everything is said and done, they want a mobile workforce. They can send to any part of the world they want, basically like tumbleweeds.
Yeah, no roots, no culture, no ability within the community to communicate with each other. That's why I say I was very touched when Randy told me that story, that there were some people here that are listening to the radio and don't even have a telephone. That's something that, you know, the government people, if you look at all of their mission statements, all of what justifies them getting the funding and things, these people without telephones, really, when you look deeply into the law which funds these federal grants, they are supposed to be the beneficiaries of the trust.
Can I just make a slight clarification here? I'm not exactly sure why the people that were telling me that they don't have a phone, they could be in an area where there's no cell service, which there are plenty of near where this person is talking, or it could be that they don't want to pay the money, or it could just be that, you know, the impression I got was that even though something like us is a lifesaver, it's a lifesaver maybe to people who just don't want to be involved with paying a phone bill or being that connected. I know there are a lot of people who appreciate just not being connected. I'm one of them.
Yeah, but did you always have a landline? Of course, landlines, you got the feeling that if it was tapped, I mean, my husband has had his privacy compromised from day one, but you used to have to get a warrant. You know,
right,
you don't just, and you really still do. I think even with the IP address discrimination, people, just because the technology to spy is very powerful, doesn't mean that you can't take that technology and completely turn it around. My husband always says, the law cuts both ways. So if somebody is snooping in on you, all you have to do is rebut it and challenge and say, you know, get out of my email address, or come forward if I don't own this email address and fess up to me that I don't own it. And admit that you deceived me. If this password, if I'm constantly having my account taken down because I send out too many emails, then that means that password really isn't my password, because you're telling me you closed it down because of a fraudster or a hacker, and I'm telling you, you're the hacker, you're the fraudster. But, you know, we want to be polite. We want to be nice. We want to be good citizens. And we think, how can we challenge these people? You learned, Werner, right, with a lot of years and blood, sweat, and tears, you tromped over to the universities, you tromped over to the government people. You even told me once you went into a church and you looked directly at who your research told you was the source of the problem. Can you describe that experience?
I didn't just only do it once, I did it twice.
Describe that.
Well, after, again, so much carnage had been done on my animals, and I thought, aren't there any decent people left in the community that finally have the courage to stand up? So on Sunday morning, I just walked into the local church. The pastor stopped preaching, and I turned around and looked at the congregation and walked back out. And each time, the person came out, a member of the congregation, and we had a good long talk, and I explained the situation.
Did that person in the congregation who reached out to you, did he follow up with you?
Well,
or he's afraid?
I get the impression there are family connections, and
he would have to betray his class?
To stir up controversy, they don't want to stir up a stink, And as I say, we are well on the way to what's being described in the Bible as the kingdom of the beast.
Yeah.
We are well on the way. But instead of people speaking openly out about, and they could hold those forces at bay, they are so full of fear, they don't
Right.
want to touch it, because they never know where they can get hit. Something nasty might happen to their loved ones, or it might happen to themselves. And it is such a sinister system, what's going on.
Well, maybe it sounds like this is the eternal struggle between good and evil.
Yeah.
And every...
there's some people, there's a saying, all it takes for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing.
Right.
And I added to it, and when good people do nothing, then they are not good people anymore.
Right. Right.
Paula, earlier you mentioned about fascists.
Yes.
I did the last 2 or 3 years or 4 years, thanks to the internet. Original archives are now available. I did a lot of research, and I still speak German, and I came across the public addresses and speeches Hitler gave in Parliament and at rallies. Most of the time they were half-hour speeches, And after I listened to them, and I looked at the political situation, the economic situation Germany was in, I come to the conclusion, and from what I knew from my parents, who incidentally weren't members of the party, and what I knew from relatives who went through the time, there is completely, National Socialism has been completely slandered. And all those, it might be worthwhile to look up a Sefton-Delmer. Look up Sefton-Delmer.
Can you spell it?
I think it's S-E-F-T-O-N, Delmer, D-E-L-M-E-R, E-R or A-R, A-R.
Right. You're now getting into very big paradigm differences. It seems when you're talking about an international conspiracy, the only way this conspiracy can be successful is to spin different stories in different groups. Now, it used to be different parts of the world, but now through the internet and what I call IP address discrimination, you create different chat groups and different rooms where one views the other as the problem. Now, Eustace Mullins gave me the most enlightening understanding of how the Crown, you mentioned the Crown Corporation, how the bankers got such power. In the early 1800s, this would be the equivalent of federally funded grants at the university level. They came up with 5 isms: socialism, communism, Nazism, fascism, and I can't remember the 5th one. But all of these different isms were distracting away from what the real problem was, and that is that people were being sort of seduced into taking on corporate identities. When Mussolini was called a fascist, he said, "I don't know why people call me a fascist, I'm a corporatist." And like you say, when you have to apply for a freedom of information form, just that application itself is saying, I recognize that you have this information that I would like to get. And so you've given them permission to have the information and then to release it to you, and then when you get it, you have all of this blacked out parts, instead of the real source of the problem, which is whatever the ism is, whatever the type of government is, unless somebody has been harmed by you, why are they going into your private affairs? Why are they tracking you? Why are they targeting you? How come these certain entities know how much you inherited over in Germany and how much you're going to liquidate in order to buy land here, and then as soon as they see that you've exhausted your account, they put you on a different tract? Why is that? Instead of seeing you as a valuable equity enhancer to the community, you put so much energy into building up 600 acres. That's not easy to do. That's an absolute heartbreak. That's unconscionable to seduce people, to get involved in these contracts where you don't have it revealed until you've built up an asset that, oh, by the way, this doesn't really belong to you. Those basic things have to be rebutted. And I believe this is the finest jewel of what the internet has done, and it kind of has to leapfrog from chat room to chat room as one is closed down and there's all this misinformation. I think my eyes were opened up by a lady named Ingrid Rimland, and she eventually became the wife of Ernst Zundel, who won a court case in Canada.
Paula, can we check this? Go ahead. Okay. Now
Werner, never say die, as Constitution Man says.
Let me make sure that he's...
Can you hear us, Werner?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Maybe I'm treading on territory. Maybe we leave it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think we should leave it for now, but I'd like to build up. I hear where you're going, and let me tell you, my background is my father was born in Athens, Greece. His father was Greek, and his mother was Austrian. Because his mother was Austrian, the first language that he spoke was German, and he was very, very careful when he brought his children up in this country, not to tell us a story that was so different from the mainstream. But my feeling is that the generation gap will close if parents are courageous and start to teach their children what really happened versus what they're afraid mainstream won't like. Say I'll throw something out that's less sensitive to your German background. Let's talk about the Armenian genocide. In Thessalonica, in Greece, that's an area of a lot of Jewish population. Now, the Armenians were the bureaucrats for the Ottoman Empire. By taking out the Armenians, the 6 million Armenians, you could bring the Ottoman Empire to its knees, which is what happened. And then the British, corporate interests could move in. Well, I was at a country club in Westchester with my aunt, who's Greek, and she had a friend there and his wife. And when I found out he was from Thessalonica, I can't remember if he was Jewish or not. I think he was Jewish. And I mentioned this, and I realized he, as wealthy a man as he was, you could see kind of a chill went over him, and it was like he felt victimized, even though he was being depicted, say, on the internet by, I think they call it a group called the Young Turks, as being the source of the problem about the genocide of 6 million Armenians. You could feel that he felt that this was untouchable. And so here you are, a simple farmer, and you're starting to put the data together where you would have the courage to go into a church, to turn around and look at the congregation, and then walk out. And for sure, a lot of these people who are benefiting from selling off your cows when you were put in, unlawfully put in the mental hospital, when you've got people like Linda Moulton Howe, which we haven't even talked about yet, running around making documentaries and getting accolades, for studying alien abduction. You never brought up aliens, and yet they put you in the mental hospital and then sold off 100 cattle. Well, who is benefiting from owning these cattle that they're getting at a cheap price? It's somebody who wants to be respected for having money, so they go to church and show off. That was a very smart move, I think, but it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to go into a community worship service where the preacher stops. That means the preacher knows how many people are going to confession. And when they confess, that priest has a lot of power. How many people at the last, what they call it, final unction, supreme unction, when you get the final blessing, how many people have unburdened themselves to a priest and told secrets that the priest probably wishes he didn't know after the guys died? All of these things, has to be done on the local community level, but eventually on the international level. And like I say, I had the guts to bring it up to a Thessalonican Jew in a country club in Westchester, and the reaction I got was very enlightening. I realized he's not the problem. He's just like one of your neighbors. What you were saying, that you helped to show that you were, not the stereotypical selfish German that's depicted here. And truly, as far as Nazism, all of the horror stories that we heard, it couldn't have been as bad as it is now. It's terrible now in the United States. You've got to have papers. I actually took my bicycle up 42nd Street. I was around that area, Times Square. And Randy, you wouldn't believe this. I wish I had a camera on me. I was on my bicycle, and maybe I sort of ran a stoplight or whatever. And this policeman, who is in like one of those little, like golf carts that goes around and gives parking tickets. This guy wanted me to give him my identification. Well, I know you don't need a driver's license for a bicycle. I knew enough law that I didn't have to do it, so I went my merry way. Well, he starts chasing me, and twice he starts ramming into my bicycle, and pretty soon I had a little group of a bit of a fan club watching me pedaling faster than this guy could possibly keep up with me. And he goes, "I want to arrest you." I said, "I'm going to arrest you. You have no right to do what you're doing to me." But I didn't have the time to go through booking and all of that. Nobody really wants to go through that, and that's what we're doing. It is horrifying. Werner, they're buying entire buildings and just evicting people in entire buildings, to the kangaroo courts that are going on in housing court. And when I first went into housing court years ago, they had a big memorial to 9/11, and I asked if I could, as a public access producer, have permission to videotape, the three men that fell, and because they knew these guys that died in the World Trade Center. And they said, no, you can't have permission, and it takes many months. You have to write for permission. Well, now the police have seen me coming and going so much, and one was even wise enough to tell me to go to the self-help room, and I figured, oh man, I'm so sophisticated, I'm light years beyond the self-help room. But I just decided to follow him up on it, and I picked up a book, The ABC of, now you're going to housing court. And I realized the most basic things I did not get. We didn't have a fair trial. We didn't have any trial. You have a trial where you cross-examine, and it's not hearsay. Summary judgment is based on sworn affidavits. The guy who eventually chased us out of our apartment, purportedly with the landlord eviction, he never even signed a proper warrant, a proper motion before the court, and we had the head clerk speaking in court, sweating bullets, and finally saying the papers speak for themselves, because the judge said, oh, there's a motion here. I said, no, there isn't. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. And she said, there's a warrant. This is a motion. This is a proper motion. I said, no, it's not. It's not signed. And she said, yes, it is. And I said, I do not accept your assertion that this is a motion. And she recused herself. Then they trundle you over to another judge, but really, even that's unlawful. They should serve you over. They should do all of this stuff. But, we just go along with it because, Joe is such an honorable man. He's nothing but honorable. And he wants the case to stand on its merits, but we never had that chance. But the point of all of this digression is when I went into housing court and saw the police, and I said, can I, this a couple of years went by, and I said, can I videotape the memorial? And they go, sure. They are on our side. They don't like what's happening. They don't like what they're seeing.
Paula, I did that over the years too. When I was at demonstration and so, I spoke to police officers. Because I didn't want to create a rift, and I wanted to foster understanding, and show them what will be the consequences, if there isn't communication and goodwill between the public and the police.
Right.
Then basically society disintegrates and ends up into chaos.
Right.
And this is what happens especially on your side of the border and in the big cities, in some of the big cities, And what is left behind? A wasteland.
Right. And so when you reached out on a natural person to natural person level versus corporate policy, they responded, didn't they? Yes.
Every so often you encountered what you call a horse's rear end, but as a whole,
Right. Well, I don't know. I feel when we go in there, we've got people rooting for us. So that's a good thing.
That's what in the end counts. One person at a time.
Right.
It is a tedious way, but I preferred, the other way, where people resort to violence,
Right. Well, I really appreciate, Werner, you taking all this time to spend with us, and I'm really looking forward to editing this and to putting this message out. I think Woodstock Public Access TV is going to be up and running, so